Imagine you're driving down a dark mountain highway. Late at night. The road is empty. No cell phones, no GPS. Just miles of forest surrounding you on every side. Above the trees, a large light appears in the sky. At first, it seems harmless. Maybe a star, maybe a plane. But then it starts moving, following you, watching you, getting closer. What begins as a routine drive home soon turns into one of the most famous controversial UFO encounters in history. A case that would introduce the world to the idea of an alien abduction. Missing time, strange medical examinations, and beings from another world. Tonight, we're diving deep into the story of Betty and Barney Hill. A story that has fascinated believers, skeptics, psychologists, and UFO researchers for more than 60 years. This is the Redacted Tapes.
What is your name, please?
My name is Barney Hill.
Betty and Barney Hill were reportedly snatched up by aliens in a flying saucer.
Beings that had been on the craft, but now standing in the middle of the road, blocking.
Before we get into the encounter itself, it's important to understand who Betty and Barney Hill are. They weren't attention seekers. They weren't science fiction writers. They weren't known for making outrageous claims. In fact, they were considered respectable members of their community. Barney Hill was a postal worker and a civil rights activist. Betty Hill worked as a social worker. The couple lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire during the early 1960s. Interracial marriages were still uncommon and often met with violence, but Betty and Barney built a life together despite the challenges. Friends described them as intelligent, grounded, and practical, which is one of the reasons why their story captures so much attention. They didn't fit the stereotype of people looking for fame. On December 19, 1961, Betty and Barney were returning home from a vacation in Canada. The drive was long, hours of winding roads through the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was late. The roads were nearly empty. The couple expected nothing more exciting than getting home and going to bed. Around 10:30 p.m., Betty noticed a bright light in the sky. At first, she ignored it, but the object didn't behave like a normal star. It seemed to move, stop, and then change direction. As they continued driving, the object appeared again and again. Eventually, Betty became convinced it was following them. Curiosity sparked, and the couple pulled over. Using binoculars, Barney observed the object. What he saw would haunt him for years. According to Barney, the object appeared enormous, far larger than any aircraft he's ever seen. He later described it as a silent disc-shaped craft. Then something happened that terrified him. Through the windows of the object, he claimed he could see figures in it, looking back at him, watching and observing him, almost as if they were aware he was there. Barney became overwhelmed with fear. He later said he had a distinct feeling that occupants intended to capture them. He ran back to the car and he told Betty they needed to leave immediately. The couple sped away in the darkness, but the encounter wasn't over. As they drove, they heard strange buzzing sounds. The noise seemed to vibrate throughout the vehicle. The sound came suddenly, then everything became blurry. The next thing they remember was hearing another buzzing noise. Only now, they were much farther down the road. Almost 2 hours had passed. 2 hours they couldn't remember. The Hills had experienced what UFO researchers would call missing time. At that time, they had no idea what that meant. All they knew was something was very wrong. Very wrong.
Barney and Betty Hill, they were residents of New England who were abducted in 1963, taken up into a ship, operated upon, and released. And their story is as credible as any I've ever read. And I just don't see how they would make up that kind of a story, why they would want to, put themselves through all that trouble. And it's a gripping, fascinating, thrilling.
When they arrived home, neither felt normal. Betty noticed her dress was torn, her shoes were scuffed, the couple's watches had stopped working.
Well, there was a stain on Betty's dress.
A stain on her dress is so interesting to me.
It was a fluid that they used in the testing, that some kind of a fluid.
The alien testing?
That they did when they drew ova from her and they drew sperm from him. Now, in the back of the car, there was a couple of marks.
Barney felt physically exhausted, mentally drained. The experience lingered in their minds a bit. Something had happened, but neither could explain what. Days turned into weeks. Then nightmares began. About 10 days after the encounter, Betty started having vivid dreams. They felt different from ordinary dreams, more detailed, more real. In these dreams, she remembered being stalked by strange beings. She recalled being escorted aboard a spacecraft. She described humanoid creatures with large eyes and unusual facial features.
Eyes are wider spaced than ours.
Right.
The nose is smaller and a thin slit for a mouth. No hair, no protruding part of the ear. We were taken on board and we were told to relax, no harm was going to come to us, and we did.
The beings separated her from Barney. They performed examinations, measured her body, asked questions, collected samples, and at one point, she claimed a needle was inserted into her abdomen, a procedure she interpreted as some kind of pregnancy test. The beings seemed fascinated by humans, like scientists examining a newly discovered species. Then came one of the most famous moments in UFO history. Betty claimed that one of the beings showed her a map of the stars. When she asked where they came from, the leader pointed to a specific location on the map. Years later, she would attempt to recreate it from memory.
When I asked the leader where he was from, I said, I know you're not from this planet. And this is when I saw the star map. It looked almost like I was looking out a window. It had dimension to it. It was about 3 or 4 feet long and about 2 feet high. There were all these balls of light in it. And the leader explained to me that the heavy lines were places they go all the time or frequently. The broken lines were expeditions. He asked me if I knew where I was on the map, and I told him no.
The drawing would become known as the famous Hill star map. But at the time, Betty believed they were only dreams. At least that's what she told herself.
I have a connection to that because Barry said they're from the Zeta Reticuli star system, and I believe it's Betty Hill drew a map of the Zeta Reticuli star system and said this is part of their roots.
Whoa.
She wanted to know why they were here, what's going on. They showed her a map, am I right?
They showed her a map.
And they said, do you understand this? And she said, no. And they said, well, why should we tell you anymore? And
Barney's reaction was very different. He didn't want to talk about the incident. In fact, he became increasingly anxious whenever it was mentioned. Friends noticed changes in him. He became stressed, troubled, unable to fully process what had happened. The experience seemed to weigh heavily on him. His health began suffering. Eventually, the couple sought professional help. That decision would change everything. In 1964, psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon began working with the Hills. His goal wasn't to investigate the aliens. His goal was simply to help Barney manage his anxiety. To do this, Simon used hypnosis. What happened next shocked everybody. Under hypnosis, Betty and Barney independently described remarkably similar sequence of events. Both recalled being taken aboard a craft. Both described medical examinations. Both described non-human beings. Both recalled details they claimed had been buried beneath conscious memory. Barney's descriptions were specifically disturbing. He described creatures with bald heads, gray skin, and large eyes that wrapped around the side of their faces. Today, those features sound familiar, but remember, this was years before the image of the gray alien became part of popular culture. Many UFO researchers believe Barney's description helped create the modern image of extraterrestrial.
There are 3 generally accepted kinds of aliens: the grays, insectoids, and the reptilians. But 9 times out of 10, what people report seeing are the grays. In fact, I'm dubious about the other 2 altogether.
One of the biggest mysteries surrounding the case involves Betty's drawing. Years after the hypnosis sessions, she recreated the star map she claims she saw aboard of the craft.
And so he said if I did not know where I was on the map, then there was no point of trying to explain it to me. I just didn't have the necessary knowledge.
For years, the drawing remained unexplained. Then an amateur researcher named Marjorie Fish attempted to identify the pattern. After years of study, Fish concluded that the map appeared to represent the Zeta Reticuli star system. Suddenly, believers had what seemed like an evidence of a possible homeworld, a destination among the stars.
Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli are the closest to each other pair of stars suitable for planets and life in our entire neighborhood. Instead of being isolated from their neighbors as we are, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 are 100 times closer to each other than we are to our nearest neighbor. It would not be surprising if space travel developed earlier between such close neighbors. Zeta 1 and 2 Reticuli are over 1 billion years older than Earth, clearly giving any beings living there a long evolutionary head start on us.
Skeptics disagreed. Many astronomers argued the drawing was too vague and could fit countless star regions. Not everybody believes the Hills encountered extraterrestrials. Psychologist Dr. Simon himself believed Betty's dream may have influenced the memories recovered during hypnosis. Critics point out that hypnosis can unintentionally create false memories. Others suggest the original UFO may have been a bright planet, a star, or even an aircraft. Some researchers believe stress, exhaustion, and anxiety combined to create a powerful shared experience. From a skeptical perspective, the Hills were not lying. They genuinely believed something extraordinary happened. The disagreement lies in what actually happened. More than 60 years later, the Hill case remains one of the most influential UFO stories ever told. Almost every alien abduction story that followed contains elements first popularized by Betty and Barney Hill: missing time, medical examinations, large-eyed humanoids, recovered memories, star maps, and alien spacecraft. Whether the Hills truly encountered visitors from another world or experienced something psychological, the story changed UFO history forever. And perhaps that's why people still talk about it. Because despite decades of investigation, one question remains unanswered. What happened during those 2 missing hours? Were Betty and Barney Hill victims of a misunderstanding? A psychological mystery? Or were they the first people to tell the world they had been taken by something not from this earth? The truth remains out there, waiting, hidden in the darkness between the stars. The Betty and Barney Hill encounter remains one of the most compelling mysteries in the UFO history. Some see it as proof that we're not alone. Others view it as a fascinating example of memory, perception, and belief. Whatever your conclusion, one thing is certain. The story has left a permanent mark on our culture and helped shape how we imagine alien visitors even today. But what do you think? Did Betty and Barney Hill encounter extraterrestrials? Or was there another explanation hiding in the shadows? Let us know. Until next time, keep questioning, keep researching, and if you enjoyed this episode of the Redacted Tapes, be sure to follow, share, and join us next time as we continue to explore the paranormal, the unexplained, and the stories hidden between fact and mystery. This has been Redacted Tapes.